Okay, YouTube, we are back again this week for another video portion of the Daily Dose Sports Podcast. Hopefully you are enjoying these every week. I hope that everyone out there is doing well. Hope you're all staying healthy. We are going to have a very historical Daily Dose Top 5 for you this week, and I think it's actually an extremely important one. I hope you like it, so let's go ahead and jump into that right now. Now, as we do every week, we need to get to our Daily Dose Top 5. Hey, right now, we are in a very weird place in the world, but in a very weird place, specifically in sports. Because the world of sports, for the most part, it's at a dead standstill. The NBA was the first league to suspend its season back on March 12th. And then the NCAA canceled all remaining spring and winter championships, including the men's and women's basketball tournaments. Major League Baseball canceled the remainder of spring training. The 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo were canceled. And all sports right now are still on hiatus. Now, there are a few countries that are starting to do some things in empty stadiums. There are a lot of video games being played and put on TV. We saw UFC 249 take place in Jacksonville over this past weekend. No spectators were present, but I'm told they had a ton of betting on it. But sports has pretty much screeched to a halt. Well, here's the thing. This actually isn't the first time this has ever happened. I've got 5 examples of other times that the sports world had to stand still. And they all have one very important thing in common. And I think it's something we can learn from today. So let's go ahead and jump in with number 5. It was back on November 22nd, 1963, that the 35th president of the United States of America, John F. Kennedy, was struck down by assassin's bullets down in Dallas, Texas. And while we could discuss who did it, we could discuss a number of conspiracies involved in that whole situation, here's the biggest thing to remember. The leader of the free world had been shot and killed. And this happened at a time when television was coming out. And so the world got the news in real time. We actually have a clip from CBS with Walter Cronkite. While the nation mourned Kennedy's death, the NFL actually decided to go ahead and play games anyways, just days later. The league, under then Commissioner Pete Rozelle, took some serious heat for doing that. Even though Kennedy's press secretary, P.A. Salinger, was a close friend of the commissioner, and the two had discussed how best to move forward after the president's assassination, and they decided they should go ahead and play the games, a lot of people didn't like it. They said you should have held off. And later, Pete Rozelle said it was his biggest regret in his career. But those NFL games were not broadcast on TV due to the ongoing coverage of the assassination. Meanwhile, we had Navy, who was supposed to play Army in the biggest college football game on the schedule that week, and they postponed that game. They didn't play it. It had to come to a stop. Not everything got canceled, but a few things did. Then again, our president had been killed in cold blood. So, it was understandable. JFK's assassination comes in at number 5 on our list today. Moving on to number 4, and on October 17th, 1989, Game 3 of the World Series was getting ready to begin between the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants. Yes, it was an all-California series, and the West Coast was getting ready to tune in, and then everything changed. We actually have a clip of that scary moment from ABC. The Loma Prieta earthquake hit at 5:04 p.m. local time. It was centered near Santa Cruz. That's just 70 miles away from where the World Series was. Those on hand to attend the game felt a shock of a 6.9 tremor. That's huge. The San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge had severe damage. The Cypress Street Viaduct on Interstate 880 collapsed. 31 buildings had to eventually be demolished. The scenes of the entire area on TV, they were horrifying. There were fires, there were landslides, there were car crashes. A total of 63 people died and nearly 4,000 people were injured. The World Series had to be stopped. They stopped it for over a week. Then on October 27th, the series would eventually resume. The Oakland A's would go on to sweep the Giants in 4 games, but baseball stopped in 1989, and it comes in at number 4 on our list. We move on to number 3 on our list. of times that sports had to stop in the past. And we get to one that changed the world forever. A beautiful fall morning turned absolutely horrible in just a few short minutes on September 11, 2001, when terrorists hijacked 4 airliners in the northeastern United States. Hey, if you were around at this time, you remember where you were. You remember what you were doing when 2 of those planes hit the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Another plane crashed into the Pentagon. The final plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. The attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 fatalities, over 25,000 injuries, and substantial long-term health consequences, in addition to over $10 billion in property damages. Major League Baseball stopped playing for a week. The NFL followed, and they kind of shuffled their schedule around as well. College football stopped all of their games for a week as well too. Sports would return, and it would eventually bring a level of normalcy to everyone, but there were some extremely dark days following 9/11, and sports, unfortunately, had to take a back seat to reality. 9/11 comes in at number 3. We now reach number 2 on our list of times that sports had to stop. And we get to a big one, because the war to end all wars broke out in Europe in 1914, and when the United States joined the fray in 1917, it brought a number of sports to a halt. Major League Baseball was forced to shorten their 1918 season, and from the 16 teams in the league, 255 players, that's almost 40%, entered the armed services in some way. Others went to work in various war industries. The Indianapolis 500 stopped running their annual race for 2 years in 17 and in 18. And of course, the 1916 Olympic Games that were scheduled for Berlin had to be canceled. Now, the Allied powers would eventually get the win in the war, but not before the United States suffered over 100,000 casualties. And that was actually low. Germany lost over 2 million people, in a losing cause no less. Russia had nearly that, and they actually won. World War I stopped sports, and understandably so. There were some very serious things at hand. So we reached number 1 on our list of times that sports had to take a back seat and stop for other things going on in the world. If we thought the Great War was bad, yeah, just wait until you see the sequel. Because in 1937, Japan and China started fighting. Then in 1939, Hitler had Germany invading Poland, and the Second World War was on. The United States, they initially tried to stay out of it, but in 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. jumped in with both feet. A total of 500 plus Major League Baseball players fought in World War II. Many of them gave up more than a season of their playing career in the process to go do so. And I'm not talking like guys you didn't know. I'm talking about future Hall of Famers, Ted Williams and Stan Musial and Joe DiMaggio went and fought. Many older players actually had to come back and play in the Major League games just so they'd have enough players. And the Women's League actually gained some major popularity. Once again, the Indy 500 was shut down for 4 years from 1942 until 1945. The Olympics were canceled in both 1940 and in 1944. The NFL lost the number of players that had to go serve, and several teams actually had to be combined to have enough players. In all, in World War II, the U.S. suffered over 400,000 casualties. That's a pretty hefty toll. And it was nowhere near what other countries sustained. The Soviet Union lost anywhere from 20 to 27 million. And of course, we know the world's Jewish population suffered indescribable losses. World War II, it was just way too important to have sports going on. And so sports had to stop. So now we get to the big question. When will sports come back? And that's really hard to say because this all feels brand new, even though it's actually not. But it feels like it is. Did you realize that back in 1918, the Spanish flu actually tore through the United States and killed more than 675,000 people? And remember, this was coming at the tail end of World War I. According to a report in the Charleston Post and Courier, 18 schools did not play college football at all in 1918 because of the flu and because of the war. While there were some who felt college football should completely shut down because of the pandemic, President Woodrow Wilson felt that football added to the overall morale of the country. As a result, football teams were created at various military posts around the country, and they actually played against some well-established college teams. Many schools were not able to play until late October, even into early November. The annual Army-Navy game was not played, and many schools played just 3 or 4 games. But they played, and they played with fans in the stands. In fact, they played with fans in the stands wearing masks. I will post a picture of that on Friday on our Daly Dose website. You can go see fans at those games wearing masks in the stands. So believe it or not, we have actually gone through something at least a little bit similar before. Of course, now we're hearing a number of things as to restarting sports. Players, politicians, media people, they are saying things like, until the risk is 0%, we can't return. I have heard some of the same people say they aren't even sure that we can ever go back to playing sports. I mean, what does any of it matter? There is an article in the Washington Post that says, and I'm quoting this, the pandemic has reminded us we don't need more sports in our lives. We need less. I've got news for you. You couldn't be further from the truth. And you couldn't be further away from what most of us are thinking and feeling. Here's the thing. President Woodrow Wilson was right. Sports do matter. We do need sports. They do raise morale. They bring us together in ways most people would say aren't possible. I'm telling you right now, go to a game. Watch how religion and race and sexuality and income levels, they all go out the window. We are all cheering for our team. And we high-five each other like we're the best of friends. Look, I'm not trying to go all political here. I don't care if you wear a red shirt or if you wear a blue shirt. I'm not saying let's go protest to get our movie theaters open or our hair salons open or whatever. Let's be smart about all this. But when I hear the media telling us things like, actually, more people have died from this pandemic than in Vietnam or even in 9/11, I've got news for you. That's fear-mongering. That's not comparing apples to apples. That's like comparing apples to doorknobs or something. 9/11 didn't hit every single city like this is hitting. And why did you pick Vietnam? Unless you're just looking for a number that fits your narrative. I mean, go after World War II. Go after the Civil War. You're just trying to be sensational. You're trying to scare people. I have heard people say we should cancel sports. We should cancel elections. We should just cancel everything. You do realize we had presidential elections during both the Civil War and World War II, right? I mean, at least go study some history. But when I hear people say sports can't return until the risk is 0%, I have to think either you're an imbecile or you're not being intellectually honest. Nothing is ever 0%. Life isn't 0%. Life isn't lived that way. You might get hit by a bus on your way to the game. We take risks every single day. That's life. Life is complicated. We don't always understand it. It doesn't always make sense, but we weren't meant to hide under our beds. I mean, I heard an NFL player say this. They said, we can't return until the risk is 0%. Call me crazy, but those football head injuries are way riskier than this virus to a young, healthy person like you. I'm not saying we should return to sports no matter what, and safety aside. I'm not saying those things. I really am not. But we do need to return. Sports is good for us. We do need sports. It's good for us economically. It's good for us physically. It's good for us emotionally. Hey, maybe we have to wear masks. Maybe it's a little bit weird. Maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable for a while. But the more data that comes out, the more it sounds like a return to sports can and will happen. And as you saw on our Daly Dose Top 5 today, all 5 of these tragedies that stopped sports completely had one thing in common. Sports came back. In fact, sports came back even stronger. Okay, YouTube, this week on the show, we had some breaking news to talk, and we took a closer look at the 2020 NFL schedule and some of the best games on it. So make sure that you go download the rest of the podcast. I'll leave a link down in the comments on YouTube, and you can go check that out. Hey, thanks for watching. Stay healthy, stay positive. I think sports are going to come back soon. I'll see you all next week.